I'm back! Before I start reviewing Bright Memory, I have to clarify that this is actually two games that I'll be taking a look at. The first was sort of an early access test build, made to figure out level design, mechanics, story, enemies and so on. And the other is Bright Memory Infinite, the one with the extra subtitle, which improves upon the early access versions in many ways and provides more content, story, and has all around more substance to it. Both games are rather short endeavors, so comparing them will be easy. Bright Memory takes a lot of influence, most notably from shooters like Titanfall or Call of Duty, but also a bit of Devil May Cry in combat and its rating system. You play as a special operative called Sheila, who we as of now have no backstory to or know who she's working for. Not as if it ever matters, since the short demo doesn't really try to establish anything regarding its universe, story or characters. You break into this random facility and make your first encounter with some of the enemies you'll be fighting against, which definitely leave off a great first impression. Nevertheless, you shoot your way through this facility, interact with a control system and have a short dialogue with the supposed villain to be in this game. At least he would be that if he appeared more than once, and he's not an infinite either. Everything here feels more like a proof of concept rather than a slice of what exactly to expect once you get your hands on the final version, which makes sense. After that short first cutscene you get dropped into the game world, which is where you get introduced into more of the combat mechanics. You actually carry a blade with you. With that you can open barricades, at least when the level design requires you to, or send flying blade attacks at enemies from any distance. You also have two extra abilities that come with the blade, a light slash and a blast slash that's sort of a stomp attack to throw enemies into the air and put them into a sort of stasis. Compare that to the leash from Bulletstorm, which isn't actually the only ability that seems to be inspired by that game. There's also a sort of pull ability, but rather than pulling the enemy onto you, it's the reverse and you push yourself to attack, which in most cases seems entirely useless since enemies come in droves to attack you and you throw yourself into the situation of getting jumped. You also get an evasive dash ability, which allows you to quickly maneuver out of enemy attacks, similar to something Advanced Warfare has or Halo 5. By accumulating XP you can unlock new powerful moves with skills. Passive skills like reducing damage taken, making air attacks possible, or active new skills like increasing damage output for several seconds, a force field that does area damage, an electric charge that does continuous lightning damage, freezing time and so on. Probably inspired by games like Devil May Cry, there's a rating system based on your combat efforts. Rather than grading you on how effectively or stylishly you dealt with a hostile, it just grades you on continuous damage you put out. Just spamming AR or shotgun damage in a fight can already very easily boost you into an A star, S, SS or SS Superstar, you're the greatest rating of sorts. It doesn't reward you for finding the perfect way to pick apart someone, which can lead to thinking that not experimenting is already an optimal way to play. The thing is, combat already is super rough and not as satisfying as it could be. There's tons of moves you can work with, but most enemies are complete bullet sponges to kill. There are these lion type enemies which aren't too bad to deal with, the standard soldier cannon fodder that only can pose a threat within groups, a flying mini dragon that isn't too bad and incentivizes use of the blade. But then there are also those zombie-like enemies with swords and this big guy with the axe. These two are the most annoying to fight against. Both are incredible bullet sponges. Even if you're fully upgraded and spam everything that's in your repertoire, you'll still most likely just barely take their entire HP away or didn't manage to kill them entirely. There seems to be no ultimate way to handle these types of enemies with effectiveness, just dishing out everything you have and hoping the action bubble you're enclosed in bursts immediately. The rating tells you that you're doing a great job, actual combat doesn't. More issues I had with the fights is how the weapons are handled. Because of how little damage the semi-shotgun does, despite the sounds, animation, excessive screen shake trying to tell you differently, a big problem becomes how there are no upgrades or attachments for these weapons. If you need to dish out a lot of ammunition, you should have a lot of it in your magazine, or perhaps the reload time could be decreased via an upgrade. Combat flow often gets interrupted by how often you need to reload in between a fight against a single foe, leading you to spam other skills, then getting back to reloading your gun, which makes it kind of awkward. If faster reloading was the skill tree unlock, it would close in the time in between awkward interruptions and make shooting more engaging. The screen check I shortly mentioned earlier can also be very disorienting. You'll get used to it slightly, and in video form it doesn't look as bad as when you're experiencing it yourself, but I cannot imagine how someone who's susceptible to motion sickness can pull himself through this game. Movement speed could also be increased. I know dashing exists, but walking or even sprinting still feels way too slow for me. A block or deflect function for your sword or a useful slide function would have definitely rounded out things more overall. But those two elements were addressed luckily in the official sequel of Full Experience. And so you progress through the linear levels and get used to the movement. The demo definitely includes some small elements that feel tacked on and unnecessary, like this one weird puzzle or the occasional Q2E sections. Walking through the environments also serves with a bit of platforming to make use of your movement abilities more. Visually, I have to say the game looks pretty nice, but nothing outstanding. The forests are nice to look at but don't have much intricate detail. Some interiors are well put together and have that sleek futuristic look you might expect. Reflections in global illumination can look impressive too, for a title this small put together by one person. Just the cave areas or tomb sections are nothing to write home about. The daylight sections definitely got the upper hand. I also like this boss fight area here, which makes it into a nice segue into the two bosses you'll face in this demo. The first one is super simple to understand and is melee based. The way to win is to stay at a distance and deal constant damage until you win. He feels like a non-raid Destiny boss, just dishing out DPS until it's done. The design I'm also not a fan of. It has a very generic medieval Dark Knight look to it. The second boss, the God of War, yeah that's actually his name, poses more of a challenge since his attacks hit much harder and have a second phase where he gets up again. It's still based on the same DPS output strategy from the earlier boss, just not as mindless as you now have to worry about fire traps and him sending his minions as well. It's a bit more but still not quite there yet. Subsequently the final cutscene plays and the demo is done in around 20 to 30 minutes. Sheila brings up some recently hung soldiers that have no relevance to the story or the later game ever. It's as if the story is entirely disconnected from the full experience, but I'll get to that later. Bright Memory serves as an early access demo to show off what the final product Bright Memory Infinite could be once it arrives. There was a lot of work in terms of combat and boss design that needed to be done in order to get something truly great here. Somehow, somewhere it's a bit of Titanfall, a bit of Advanced Warfare and a bit of Devil May Cry, but fell short in almost all of its ideas. The problem isn't how many elements it takes from other games, but more how it executes them together. The tools are there, but there was definitely some rebalancing and additions that needed to be done to really round things out. The controls are kind of questionable as well. Nothing can be rebound to a different key in the demo. Double jumping works by holding the jump button rather than double pressing it. Dashing is supposed to work by pressing shift in the direction you want to dash into at the same time, but double pressing the directional WASD key has worked more consistently, or I think it only has worked at all this way. And there's no tips indicator that shows that it works too. The settings menu is kind of bugged. If you select something too often, what can happen is that two options get selected at the same time, leading it to become locked out and unchangeable. The FOV change also applies to the menu as well, which is hilarious because I've never seen that before. Also the fact that the slow-mo after almost every kill and the constant screen shaking cannot be turned off and makes no sense either. But look, I know, it's an outdated demo and an outdated presentation of the final product, so voicing my problems with it makes little sense as it's all been abandoned out. But what doesn't seem to be abandoned aside from marketing lies and mislead, is the support for Infinite, which I'll be going into now. Bright Memory Infinite is almost a complete overhaul of many of the game's mechanics, visuals, and fixes many of the original game's faults. First of all, the settings menu. There's now a bunch of new options to work with. You can finally rebind your keys, which however includes a minor problem which I'll be covering in the gameplay section. There's also now support for Nvidia Reflex and DLSS which has been added post-launch. And of course the addition of ray trace reflections and global illumination, which in many instances can transform the visual image greatly. I can't personally test this function myself as I don't own an RTX card, but for what I've seen it looks very impressive. Aside from the ray tracing not picking up on the boat's movements from the water. At least the developer provided an explanation. Let's talk about the beginning. This time you start in the character's apartment. We know the time period but not if it's before or after the first Bright Memory. Or if they are even connected to begin with. It's Chinese New Year, and instead of using that to have your day off from saving the world, work's calling. Literally. Abnormal weather conditions occur and we begin investigating. After a way too long QTE section for a game that's already short, we finally get into gameplay. And there's a lot that changed. First of all, the entire control scheme got changed and makes way more sense now, and also takes up less of your screen. Your character still has the blade, but the two extra functions are completely removed. The standard slash attack remained, but instead you now have a deflect function, which is extremely cool and missing from the demo. Simple bullets that are fired from ordinary soldier cannon fodder will easily kill them now and will save you your bullets. The stasis and pull function has also now been reworked. Pushing the F button or whatever you assigned it to pushes the enemy back, and if small enough, slows them down in the air, leaving you to do whatever with them for a short moment. You can also pull them into you and finish them off with the push in combination, which is very useful for picking off ranged snipers for example very quickly. The only issue I got is that there's no crosshair or indicator of sorts to how far you can pull somebody from. Pretty much all of the extra skill tree enhancements from the original game did not make the final cut in this one or got completely reworked. Instead they're categorized under exo arm, blade and weapon abilities. New functions include the Shock or Quake Punch, which is a powerful melee attack that can take down even the heaviest of enemies with a charge up. Charge up long enough after an upgrade and you get the Rocket Punch, which pretty much eviscerates everything that comes your way.
Falcon Punch!
The sword now has 3 different attacks. The Aerial Slash, which is a new way of catapulting your enemy into the air. The Blade / Whirlwind, which is a charged up rotating slash wave that deals continuous damage. The Ground Slash, which acts as a sort of stomp move for your sword and is insanely powerful when fully upgraded. Movement feels a bit smoother than before, the speed of your character is generally increased, double jumping now works by double pressing the right key, dashing works as intended. There's also sliding now, which makes going under obstacles way quicker. It's still not perfect of course. Wall running is introduced but used little aside from the occasional platforming section. The mantle animation is a little too long, and a few issues I also have are with the combat moves. It's the way the aerial slashes and the blade / whirlwinds are handled. This is where I have to get a tiny bit technical. So the aerial slash is pulled off by just holding the E key and releasing it. You can move around while you're doing it, it will still initiate. However, that will not work whenever you are sliding or you're sprinting when the blade / whirlwind is unlocked. The problem with that is that the animation for the aerial slash looks like it would be initiated out of a sprint or slide, which means that whenever you do try to pull off the aerial slash right after sprinting or sliding, either nothing happens or you get the whirlwind, which immediately slows you down. Animation and controls do not go hand in hand here, it's extremely jarring. It would have made more sense if the whirlwind attack is initiated while not sprinting or sliding and just by normally moving or standing still. But here's another example which displays the exact same issue. The push and pull function, also dubbed as both the EMP and tractor beam respectively, but I'll keep it simple for explanation's sake, as well as the shock and rocket punches are on the exact same key. However, you have to hold the key in order to activate the punches. The problem with that is that whenever you're trying to charge up, it's possible that during the heat of combat you won't be pulling it off correctly. Maybe you're pressing the keys too fast. You won't exactly pay attention to it while fighting. Now you could ask, why not rebind the keys to fit them exactly to your liking? Well, here's the issue. Exo arm abilities and sword abilities are all assigned to a keybind categorically, not individually. I couldn't say, let's put the shock and rocket punch charge ups on the U key, while push and pull are still on F. Or maybe put push on F and pull on G. So more customization I would have appreciated since I'm using a whole freaking keyboard here. We don't need to lump in skills onto one button press, that's some shit you do with consoles on controllers on your mobile version. Alright, enough nitpicking out of the way. As you progress through the game and learn the mechanics, you realize the way you fight enemies is much improved. Despite the issues I listed earlier, it's still a lot of fun to use your tools and figure out how to deal with each enemy and situation the best. Your foes are not nearly as bullet spongy anymore, and it's also displayed through HP indicators. Some of the bigger ones now have a defensive shield meter, which you have to break in creative ways to deal more damage and make them susceptible to slowing them down. This heavily armored melee soldier right here, which reminds me of some of the mechs you see in the artwork for Anthem, can have his defense easily broken by deflecting or using some of the more powerful attacks. Similar story to these gladiator type enemies here. Honestly, I think I like the samurai inspired enemy designs more. What happened to those? One of them can be easily picked off with some shotgun shells, and the other has at least a shield that has to be broken through with powerful ammo before you can deal some serious damage. You will also face more powerful heavy enemies and also this guy with the riot shield, which you can actually easily juggle with the area slash to get past his shield. Alternatively, you also have the alternate fire modes that are new to this game. The AR can shoot rockets instead of bullets, the shotgun fires incendiary bombs with shrapnel, The fully automatic pistol you later unlock shoots incredibly powerful incendiary grenades, and the sniper shoots sticky grenades. While all of these alternate fire modes are very useful, they're also a bit samey, always built on the similar explosive or incendiary ammo idea. The sniper could have used something like armor and shield piercing ammo for example instead. While the gunplay is generally satisfying, I would have liked some more weapon types like a grenade or rocket launcher, miniguns, LMGs, etc. While this game is pretty short, using those same 4 guns can get pretty repetitive early on. Moving on to progression in your playthrough, the level design is fairly linear just like in the original. It never feels restricted though, and in a few sections it works with platforming for you to use your movement abilities more, sometimes to your advantage. At certain points you'll encounter bosses to fight against, which are a lot more dynamic than in the first Bright Memory. There's different stages, attacks, and a whole shield system similar to the heavy enemies in this game, meaning when removed you'll inflict more damage and they are more susceptible to certain attacks. Here's a quick tip: use the sticky grenades from your pistol for the shield. It feels incredibly unfair and so easy. You could also learn how to deflect and save your ammo, but I'm too lazy to master that properly. Another element I liked was the section where you fought on a flying plane. If that was a little longer or more fleshed out, it would have been really awesome. I also enjoyed the overall scenery that was built in the latter half of the experience. Some genuinely stunning, but still hellscape-ish environments were put into place here. If there was something I could critique, aside from the laughably short playtime, is the lack of verticality. There are a few instances where you could jump on rooftops or platforms to gain an advantage, and use the adequate skills to have your opportunity fully paid off. But goddamn, we have a grapple function, don't we? Rather than relegating it to a few action set pieces, let it play more of a role during combat, you know? The bigger issue comes a little later after the beginning of your playthrough. For whatever reason, the developer thought it would have been a great idea to force in the Far Cry-esque stealth section into the game, just as you're about to get comfortable with the gameplay loop. Like, I was starting to have some fun here, why strip me away from everything to force me through this section for 15 minutes? It feels like they were padding out playtime here, which is hilarious since the game is already almost only 2 hours long. And what little is there to offer you have to make the best out of. No extra level with another boss perhaps, no fleshing out the plane area. Even the skyline section that was shown in this concept trailer unfortunately did not make the cut, which I would have preferred. The way it works is like every other game ever. You have a detectability bar which increases the more you're in sightline. Move away for a while and you're in the clear. It's as basic as it can get. It's also very clearly laid out how you're supposed to approach this with a little experimentation. Get spotted and it's game over. It feels like a Call of Duty mission from 2011. No matter if this was a 6-hour campaign or not, this has no place being here. Whenever I play this game I just skip over this level. On top of that we have the extremely short playtime, which certainly questions the almost €20 price point. On top of the skin bundle DLCs, because of course it has them. There's little point in replayability. Yes, you can further upgrade and power up your skills, or unlock new camos for your weapons. And then there's the Hell difficulty that unlocks later, which doesn't change anything aside from how much damage enemy attacks deal, but it's nothing different or tangible enough to keep me playing more. I'm not saying that this game has to have me hooked like a live service looter shooter, or that it has to reach that replayability factor that the Devil May Cry series has, even though it's obviously inspired by it, but just bring in new things that shake up gameplay more. Maybe more weapons to unlock, or secret weapons like in the Resident Evil series, switch up enemy spawning or quantities perhaps. Anything to surprise me. And the last point I want to touch upon is the polishing. It's not the most polished experience, but it's minor stuff really. At least months after launch in various patches. A few collision glitches where you could walk through objects, sticky grenades not detonating, time frames for when to deflect make no sense sometimes, since sometimes when you start deflecting in the middle of the combo of an enemy, their attacks can just go through you anyway and deal you damage. Furthermore, I also had an issue with heavy frame rate drops whenever a checkpoint loads, but that was usually resolved pretty quickly by just pausing the game for a moment. Despite all that, considering how most of the actual game design and presumably QA for gameplay, it's not listed in the credits aside from localization QA, was done by one person is pretty solid. Nevertheless, we judge if a product is worth our hard-earned money and time depending on what it offers at what price point, no matter how many people worked on it. And while Bright Memory Infinite isn't an experience I regretted playing and I had plenty of fun with for the most part, I think it leaves a lot to be desired for how expensive it is. If it was only $10 then maybe, but not for 16 or even 20. There's a recipe and blueprint to bring something fresh to the table mixed out of ingredients from other famous franchises, but there needs to be more refinement in terms of combat and enemy AI, more weapons and skills to work with, that could introduce a whole intricate combo system, longer playtime, and so on. I know this is much bigger in scope, which is why I would recommend to the lead designer to take on his role in a bigger studio of people that can put together a more ambitious project in around the same amount of time, or a little longer, and fully realize the potential of your ideas. Hire a proper writer that can do something more with your universe and story, because I can't remember the names of any other character other than the main protagonist, or what even their motivations were, or why we're even fighting here to begin with. Just have actual context and motives to play more of a role, you know? I'd say get Bright Memory Infinite for $10 or less, and ignore the early access game entirely. The removed and/or changed content that was in the original isn't something you're really missing out on. Thank you for watching.